Okay. This is Lecture 2, Getting Started with SAP, Fitter Snacker Overview. Who is Fitter Snacker? Fitter Snacker is a manufacturer who makes healthy snack bars. We've talked about these in the past, the NRG A bars, the Advanced Energy bars, and the NRG B, which are the bodybuilding protein bars. Each of you has 100 copies there are sort of 100 copies of data in the system, and you each get your own unique set of data using your unique number. And the example here is given that if your username is FS-02 in SAP, then your unique number would be the number PT for plant, for example, or in this case, if you're 02, it would be 02PT. Fitter Snacker uses both the following strategies, the make-to-stock production and the make-to-order production, so we do both. These are our Fitter Snacker material numbers, and as you know, when we look at the material numbers, you have your own unique number here. Then you have the type of material is, whether it's a finished, a semi-good, or a raw material, and then you have your number which follows it. So for example, in this case, number F100 would be the NRG A bars. If this were an S, say S200, then this would be S200 would be dough NRG A bars, and so on, and raw materials, which if you are R300, for example, you would be canola. So each of you has your own unique set of data, and these are just some common transaction codes that are used regularly as well. Fitter Snacker organizational element. For this semester, we're using system FS1 with client 410, but this can change from semester to semester, so you do want to ask your instructor to ensure that you have the right system number and the right client in order, because they change every semester. So you want to make sure you have the right system number and the right client information. It'll be on your course documentation. So the client is the highest level in the client. It contains all the database tables required by our SAP software. All the master records are data that's shared between the clients, and therefore it sits at the client level. So all master data sits very high in the system and is shared across the clients. That's basically what that's telling you. The number company code, where the number, of course, your unique number. All financial statements are usually produced at the company code level, and every company must have at least one company code associated with it in order to have a functioning system. This is the client structure. So in this case, they're showing you that the client is number 410. Our company code would be number FS, and our plant would be indicated by number PT, and so on, where your number sign is your unique number. And we start off with the enterprise, the company codes. They can be called companies, subsidiary, or company code. Factories or plants are the same thing. Sales organization, and then under sales organization is your department, your division, or your business area, which is all shown here under division. And of course, warehouses and storage locations under storage location. This is just the same thing, only sort of from the US perspective. They call it the enterprise. Then you have two company codes, you have these plants, and they have these storage locations. And what I like about this slide is it shows the storage locations by their nature. So we have raw materials here, work in progress, finished goods, semi-finished goods, and ROA, which I think is some kind of a service thing. Key concepts in SAP organizational levels, again, defines the enterprise structure in terms of legal requirements or business purposes. So legal entity would be things like plants, storage locations, sales orgs, profit centers, and so on. The most important thing here, and just like our purchase orders, if it's created a purchase order, then it is part of a legal document. The client, it's the highest organizational level, represents the enterprise consisting of many companies. Our company code identifies the legal entities in the enterprise, and it's central to the accounting process. And of course, then there's other organizational levels in things like logistics or procurement and production, and there are things like plant, storage location, purchasing orgs, and purchasing groups. Fitter Snacker Logistics, there are two sales divisions. One is wholesale and one direct. The wholesale, of course, sells to the middleman who distributes the bars to all the different small shops and vendors and so on, where the direct is the larger grocery stores that we have, the sporting goods stores, and other large chains. This is the Fitter Snacker production model. So we start off, the highest level of what it is that we're doing is looking at the controls. So you're going to start by opening your stock requirements list to check for stock. Then you're going to run your MRP. The purpose of running the MRP is to check capacity to see whether or not we have the appropriate number of raw materials in storage in order to make what it is that we're making. So this runs against your bill of materials, of course, so it looks at the bill of material for what it is that we're going to be creating, and it looks to see what's there. When it runs the MRP run, it creates or generates those purchase orders and purchase requisitions that we need in order to produce and have on stock the number of things that we need in order to make our production. The second part then is the actual production. Production of dough is the first one, so we're going to convert our planned orders to production orders. Then we're going to release those orders. We're going to do a goods issue of the dough to the mixer. This is where we mix and make that dough. This example up here in the corner, where we're mixing up the dough, as well as making the actual dough itself and putting it into the pans. That's called the goods issue of dough to the mixer. Then they do a confirmation, and finally the goods receipt of the semi-finished good, which is this is our semi-finished good, to storage location. Once that's in the storage location, we begin the actual production of bars. So we're going to convert our production orders, do a release of those orders. We're going to issue that dough that we made that's in the storage location. We're going to issue that back down to the shop floor for production, where we're going to bake those bars. So you're going to bake them into actual bars. The order confirmation at the work center, that's the actual bake process that gets done. And finally, the goods receipt of the finished bars to the storage location. Now these are wrapped and finished bars. Key concepts in SAP, there are different types of data. There's organizational level data, master data, and transactional data. Organizational level data is all the data elements that things like client, plant, those kinds of things. Master data deals with master records, so you might have a vendor master, material master, those kinds of things. And then transactional data is that data that we use when we move things around. So when you do a goods receipt and it's movement type 101, that's a typical of a transactional data. The document concept, an electronic record of transactions. Financial accounting documents we tend to call FI. Management accounting documents tend to be like cost accounting, so we call it CO. There are material documents, goods movements, and different types of transaction documents. As well, we need to point out that SAP, of course, is an audit software, and so it does track every keystroke that everybody makes. Material master, here are the primary views in your material master. You have your basic data, your MRP view, your accounting view, storage view, sales view, purchasing view, and you've been into the system, so you're aware of what these different views are and how they function. So this semester we'll be working with the MRP views primarily. Key concepts in SAP, organizational levels in accounting tend to be things like client, company code, business area, controlling area, and operating concerns. Organizational levels in procurement that you saw last year would be purchasing org, purchasing group, plant and storage location. Organizations in levels in fulfillment. Fulfillment, of course, is the SD side. So you saw that last year as well in sales organizations, division, distribution channels, sales area, shipping points, plants, and storage locations. And of course this semester we're doing organizational levels in production planning, which tend to be plant, warehouse, and storage locations. Key concepts in SAP, master data, it's long-term data that typically represents entities within the organization, so things like master data. Or material master is a typical example of master data. Procurement, you have your vendor, your material, conditions, info records. In production this semester we're going to be looking at the BOM or bill of material, the work centers, and the product routings. And in fulfillment you had customer, materials, conditions, info records, and in financial accounting there's the general ledger accounts. Typical transactional data generated during the process step of execution. This could include things like organizational levels, master data, or situational data. And then below here we have examples of what that might look like for a sales order, for example. Organizational level might involve the client, the company code, or the sales area. The master data might involve the customer master, the material master. And situational data might be the date, the time, the person, or the quantity that got produced. Master data, this is showing you different types of master data. We have our raw materials, our operating supplies, our semi-finished products, and our finished products. This is typical of a bill of material for a bed. It's a very simplified one, but our bed. So within our bed, we have the frame, the mattresses, and the pillows. And these component parts come together to make up a finished bed. Here's when we talk about the concept of configurable products, we talk about customization. So the bed could come in different colors, for example, silver, black, red, or special colors. It might have different types of frames, maybe a standard or deluxe, or there might be different models of beds. And so when we talk about how configurable a product is, it's the different variations of that product. Master data, or the routing talks about where the product goes on its route to completion. So it starts off as a raw material and it goes through the different activities that it goes through. In this case, the routing, it looks at work center, test, control data times. Maybe it looks at pulling together material components and or resource PRTs, production resource tools. But it's where this product goes through its efforts in order to come out at the other end as a finished product. That's your routing. Master data, the cost center idea. So you're going to have different work centers. The work centers have the cost center information associated with them. So when we build and create our work center this semester, you'll see how that costing gets allocated through the work center. The purchase order, you did these last year, so you're familiar with them, but you have your purchase requisition, request for quotation, purchase order, which of course is master data and is a legal and binding document, and it can be forwarded either to a vendor and or another plant for procurement. The goods receipt, you have your purchase order, the plant, and it will produce, once it goes through the plant, it can produce two documents in the SAP system, one called a material document that basically tracks the activities of that material, and the accounting document which tracks the associated costs of that activity within the plant. You have invoicing processing information. So once an invoice is created, the master data comes into that. So we know who's associated with that particular invoice, what vendor, and so on. The information can be taken from the purchase order and or the goods receipt information. It creates an invoice document and the payment program pays out the appropriate person. Here's a document concept, transactional document. This is a typical purchase order. You've seen these in the past and last year, so we won't need to spend a lot of time on it. But basically what we're looking at is the header information up here at the top, which usually has the name of the organization, who it's going to be shipped to, and so on, what the purchase order number is, the dates that are associated with it, and then of course the quantity and the breakdown of the orders that you've ordered and the costs associated with those, and then typically your total order costs at the very end, which these are considered our line items. So within an FI document, key concepts, you might have things like header data and item data. So that's very important. The header data, again, is shared across the entire client, where item data is associated only at plant level. So that's what's really important about these two right here, is that header data goes across the company codes, where item data only goes from plant to plant. Again, this is a material document, same thing. These are our header data information, and this is our item data information. This would be across the client. This would be associated with just the plant. Okay, now we're going to talk about core processes. So the core processes for this semester are cost, buy, make, and sell. Costing, of course, is financial accounting. Buying is the procurement process. Making is what we're doing this semester. That's production planning and execution. And the selling process is the fulfillment or sales and distribution. The next bunch of slides basically just go through the structure for each of these areas. We won't focus a lot, but you should be familiar with what these different symbols are. So FI stands for financial accounting. It's usually about creating general ledgers and reviewing different financial documents. The MM, of course, creating the purchasing and trading of goods, so that we look at purchase orders, purchase requisitions, goods receipts, and so on. The production planning this semester, we're going to be creating a planned order, creating production orders from that, issuing the material to the from inventory to the shop floor for production. We're going to produce and confirm that production, and then we're going to receive those materials from production into inventory. So that's our process for PP. The SD side, of course, is the selling of those goods, so the pre-sales activities. Oops. the process customer sales order, the pick, pack, and delivery of the item, then send the invoice to the customer and receive payment from the customer for the purchase of that item. Okay, some additional processes to look at. Inventory and warehouse management, inventory processes, customer service, enterprise asset management, financial accounting management, human resource management, and so on. So I mean, there's many additional processes that we look at. We don't cover all of these on the SAP side, but we do look at a few of them. Warehouse management, again, this is not one of the ones that we do here at the college, but warehouse management is a whole other structure in itself, and it talks about the structuring of warehouse inventory items across the different warehouses. Customer service deals with repairs and serving the customer after sales service ideas, so that's what they work on. Enterprise asset management, of course, is a cost accounting type of thing where it looks at the repair of equipment and how much it costs to settle and track different assets that organizations handle. FI is asset accounting. It looks at the creation of and purchasing of assets within the organization, and of course it completes all the depreciation information for these different assets. Overhead cost accounting looks at the cost accounting type activity, so it's the everyday cost accounting. Internal orders, same concept. It's looking at how orders are managed internally within the organization. Profit center accounting looks at profit sales, analyzes the profitability of different sales that they make. The recruiting side, it looks at hiring and recruiting employees for the organization. So what do we know about all these different processes that we have throughout the organization? We know that they're integrated and they cross over from one area to the other. And we did look at this a little bit last year in the procurement side as well, and we're going to see it again. So here we have our sales, our warehouse, our activity, and that's who we have on this, and the accounting over here. So the thing starts off with a sales order, so it goes through the sales process, and then of course are sufficient goods in place? If we have sufficient goods, yes, then it goes through the warehouse, goes out and gets sent to the customer, and gets the invoice gets tracked and paid. If we don't have sufficient goods in stock, then of course it goes through the production process, which is what we're going to do, which is going to produce something. And if we don't have enough raw materials, it comes down through the procurement process, so that we have to create those purchase orders, get those raw materials in. Once we have sufficient raw materials, then we issue the raw materials, create the product, create those finished goods, and then of course that way then it comes back up and goes through that sales process again towards the end. So we can see, based on this very simple example, that the process of creating a product crosses all sections of the organization. So what are the project management key features as they relate to production planning? Well, the most important things to understand about the production planning chapter is that there are three project phases in play. There's planning, scheduling, and controlling, and of course we deal with all three. We do a lot of planning, we do a great deal of scheduling within that, and of course the control functions. Within the chapter, it talks about the concept of a work breakdown schedule because it's dealing with process planning in relation to project management. But of course, in our case, we're going to be dealing with the bill of materials, which is basically the same thing as a work breakdown schedule or work breakdown structure, is a bill of materials. In a breakdown structure of a bill of materials, it divides all the major products into subcomponents. So you have this list of all these different components, which then gets listed in here. So basically the bill of materials is very much like a work breakdown structure for the production planning process. Scheduling of dates, quantities, and times also is one of the most important things that gets looked at as well. So we don't only break down the parts, but once we begin scheduling, we look at all the dates, quantities, and times the same as they do within the scheduling of the project management side. So now we're going to talk about logging in. We of course have logged in the past, so I don't have to go through this with a great deal of explanation. You're going to have your system number. I believe for this semester you guys are FS1 client 410. So you're going to end up logging in. You're going to need a new password that you'll be given your password from the client, of course, and then you'll create your own new user password. I would recommend that you use your college password so you don't forget it. The navigation, we've been through these again as well, but accept, return, okay is our check mark. The check mark with the clock, of course, is the execution. Oops. We have our back button, our save button, and our exit buttons. We have our menu process, so we know how to follow the menu down to what it is that we'll be working on. Now, when we talk about planning levels, we're going to talk at the macro level and micro level. Up here at the highest level, or the macro level, we talk about business planning. And business planning involves things like return on investment, or actually at the very highest level it talks about things like strategy and mission and goals and all of the things that we see in Chapter 2. Then, of course, we talk about business planning as well in relation to return on investment and product analysis and product groups and so on, which is very important. We also talk about SOP, or sales and operations planning, and depending on whether or not we're talking about Apex calls it S and OP, but in SAP we just call it SOP, not sales and OP. And it, of course, involves things like rough cut planning and looking at independent requirements. And independent requirements are requirements that we create in order to do things like forecasting. Then you have the demand side. The demand side looks at the actual customer or dependent demand, which are the customer orders that get created based on the bill of material that gets generated. And then we have our MPS, which is our master planning schedule, and that looks at stock requirements list and the MRP requirements list, which is the product families and the independent requirements. And finally, within MRP, that's what explodes the bill of materials, and that would be component planning, dependent requirements, and the purchase of all requirements for raw materials. Now, within SAP, you should as well know that MPS and MRP are basically the same tool. They're just run differently. When you run MPS, you run it at a higher level of product groups, and when you run MRP, you're basically exploding the bill of material and running it at the BOM level. So there are 8 levels that we need to, 8 planning levels that we need to be familiar with. The first one is the organizational business planning, process of determining the broad, long-range strategic direction of an organization, mission, strategy, and culture are typical examples. Your sales and operations planning, process of determining a production plan for a product group. These might deal with, return on investment, product analysis, product groups, maybe rough cut planning, and sales forecasting are the typical things that we look at. With demand planning, we look at customer requirements planning, so the actual sales orders, and sales forecasting. So those are the 2 areas for demand. MPS, master production schedule, a process of determining a production plan for all end units is as far as a high-level product group is concerned. So we tend to look at product families at that level. And then, of course, as I said, the MRP, which is basically the same tool, material requirements planning, it's a process of determining the production schedule for component parts. So that comes from our bill of material type planning. Under that, you'll have different types of scheduling that will go on. There's vendor scheduling and operation scheduling. Vendor scheduling tends to be the process of determining a detailed schedule for manufactured components, where the operation scheduling is a process of determining a detailed schedule for manufactured components. And both of these, of course, deal with dates and times. And then, of course, you have your production execution. This is your shop floor manufacturing. And finally, the production control. And you can see here that the 7 is jumped down because the 7 is actually sitting up here. Sitting up here should be on this line. So this is really 7 and 8. So production execution, and the last one is production control, PAC, which stands for production activity control. It's the process of determining if actual production is meeting the planned production, and if not, what do we do about it? And if so, what are all the feedback, the costing, and the controls and maintenance that needs to be addressed as part of that planning process. So we're starting off then our discussions at now that's sort of an overview of everything. What we're starting here is at the highest level of the business planning level. So a statement of long-range strategy with a focus on growth, profitability, return on investment, market share, customer service, reputation, and company value. Revenue, cost, and profit objectives accompanied by a vision, which of course is where the company sees itself, and the mission, which is the purpose statement of what the purpose is that the company needs to try to achieve. They also look at things like market growth, competition, differentiation, and marketing objectives. Also budgets, projected balance sheets, cash flow statements, strategy, what's new and emerging technologies for the different product lines, the organization and its resources, and then of course the primary stockholders' interests and what it is that they want to see achieved in order to get their return on investment. Characteristics of integrated systems: we have long-range and short-range planning, broader to more specific planning, higher level plans tied directly to lower level plans, a formal process in place, ongoing feedback of execution, a closed loop, ties planning, execution, and control. It's all about one database, and the whole database, of course, is integrated in real time so that whatever happens in one aspect of the database is reflected in the other aspect of something else that you're doing. So that's what we talk about when we talk about an integrated system. And of course, we've had these discussions in class in the past as well, so this should be pretty familiar for you. What are the typical roles and responsibilities by different levels? Well, when we talk about business planning, we talk about the CEO, the president, the mission and objectives, and a 3 to 5 year plan. It's quarterly, and the planning cycle is yearly. When we talk about SOP, we talk about vice presidents. It's usually a much smaller horizon of 1 to 3 years, and it's usually done on a planning cycle of quarterly. MPS is usually done weekly, MRP done weekly as well, and of course the detailed schedule is looked at daily, if not hourly. Production family and groups. These represent how product is represented in the markets. They're logical groupings based on similar sales and manufacturing. They should have meaningful terms of volumes of sales that are generated. They usually don't include any more than 6 to 12 groups per unit, and they tend to be broken down by product families. Rough cut capacity planning, or RCCP, verifies whether sufficient capacity is available to meet the capacity requirements for the master schedules. And of course, we're going to be creating a rough cut plan ourselves, so we'll look at that in some detail. Rough cut is a long-term plan capacity planning tool, and it looks at how we balance the requirements against the available capacity that we have in place. This is an MRP calculation, so I think I'm going to stop here and we'll start the next one here because I'm going to run out of space. So we'll stop this presentation and I'll restart it in just a minute.